G'day ladies and gents, and welcome to the Chieftain Mark V. This tank, I don't believe I've ever featured it on the channel at all. Maybe once in like a kill montage or something like that. And to be honest, there isn't anything terribly remarkable if you compare it to the Chieftain Mark III. It's got an extra like 100 or 150 horsepower, and that's really about it. But seeing as though I put a talisman on it back in patch 1.71 in order to grind out the Chieftain Mark X, and I thought I might just give it a go. I thought, you know what, it's been a while, and I sort of want the warrior. Not gonna lie, I am hyped for the British to get a mobile vehicle, but we'll talk a little bit more about that later. It was kind of exciting to me, so I thought, you know what, maybe I'll grind. And I decided to play a couple of games, and this was one of them. Here you can see quickly dispatch of an Object 906 in the ammo rack. I was pleasantly surprised, not gonna lie. Last time I played the Chieftain Mark V, it wasn't fun at all to play. The gun didn't perform terribly well. The mobility was piss poor. It still is, but we'll get to that later. And the armor was severely lacking in, obviously, Lower Glacis side. And for me, it was an overall rubbish tank. It wasn't fun. You were forced in playing passively, and there was nothing you could really do if you were given a city map, which was a real shame, because there was just nothing for you. You had to sit outside the city and wait for someone to come out, and you went into cap and instantly got slaughtered, and it just wasn't fun. But now, with the battle ratings being spread out, you're one of the not more mobile tanks, but you're a bit higher on the pack. You're no longer one of the slowest tanks at the battle rating. You've got a bit of mobility behind you. The armor is a lot more valuable considering that the MBT-70 and the T-64 have been moved up. And the higher the battle ratings go, the more penetration, obviously, and the better mobility and more outclassed. And seeing though the Chieftain is in a really good spot for battle ratings where it's spread out enough is a really good indicator that, hey, maybe you could put a talisman on this thing. And I certainly would if I had my time again. I've got a talisman on it already, but if I were going through the British tree, the Chieftain Mark V is not a bad tank to put in your lineup and put a talisman on, use it for grinding. Especially now. I didn't realize until recently that the APDS got buffed. And whilst on paper it looks like the APDS got a massive nerf, the post-penetration damage seems to have been massively increased since I last played it. And the angled penetration seems to be massively increased as well. So it's a bit of a win-win for the Chieftain. It's not nearly as mobile, but you don't use it that way. Whilst, personally, I play very aggressively, and that's the way I like to use my tanks. I'm an aggressive player. You don't have to, and sometimes it may just work. Sometimes you may need to play aggressively, sometimes you may need to play passively, and in this game, I'm playing aggressively. And I'll run through my thought processes and what I'm thinking. The first thing you've got to remember with the Chieftain is it's got a very strong turret and it's got very weak Lower Glacis and sides. So you don't want anything flanking you, and you don't want anything shooting your Lower Glacis. So your best friend is a ridgeline. If you have a ridgeline in any map, work it. Work that ridgeline. If there's nothing, then go around the ridgeline and look for another one. And just keep pushing up, pushing up, pushing up until you reach that capture point. You have to keep an eye out for your team as well, especially the more mobile of your team. XM1s, MBT-70s, anything that is faster than you will naturally go ahead of you. And they'll be the ones to spot, they'll be the ones to take the hits, and you have to be there to support them. So keep your team within range. I noticed that heavy tank I mean, it's only an IS-2, but I still noticed it on the minimap, and I noticed that it was pushing towards the XM1, so I decided to take it out. You have to work as a team, especially in this tank, because it is a support tank. It's not a frontline pusher. Because the moment you try to push out around a corner, you've only got 100 mils of lower glacis to protect you. And a Panzer IV can punch through that without any issue. So you've got to be really mindful of where that lower glacis sits. As you can see here at this point in the recording, I feel a little bit exposed. And I see that object 120. I load the Hesh. And whilst you could use the APDS, I decided to give Hesh a go. And it seems to be okay. But you can see here I'm using these railway stations for a bit of cover, hiding behind the trains, sort of using that platform to hide the lower glacis because it's so vulnerable. And then I go back for A. Now, I shouldn't have waited to cap A, for them to cap A, and I should have gone back and contested it. But I was unsure of where the enemy would be, because the first thing that you do when you've captured a point is you move off the point. Because if anyone is going to come and capture the point, they're going to go straight for it. And they're going to look at a convenient way to assault the capture point, and it's going to leave you in an exposed position. Now, what I'd like to do is if I've got a bit of time to spare, if I've got some tickets to spare, I don't go for the cap. Because if there's a T10M or something big and scary, it's going to come in pretty quickly and it's going to take me out pretty quickly. So I need to make sure that whatever took that capture point is dead. And unfortunately for me, whilst I do find what was taking it out, what was taking the cap, I waste way too much time. I waste way too much time chasing nothing but a shilker. Now, it was a bit of a gamble, and this potentially cost us the match. A bit of a spoiler, we did lose, but the team fell apart as well. So you do win as a team and lose as a team, but at the same time, you'll see how this match goes. So I try and ask the SPAAs that are sitting a little bit south of me to come up and cap because it's free. And the team is starting to fall apart. We're losing map control. And there's not a whole lot we can do. Especially in a Chieftain, which just simply lacks the mobility. There's nothing you can do. You are a support tank. So you can't be the team. Doesn't matter how many kills you get. If you can't move in to capture those points, you're useless. Unless you can make yourself available to your team. And in this case, there is no team around me. I am the team around me. It's unfortunate for a tank like the Chieftain, which is such a nice tank, and it's a lot of fun to play if you get decent games. Unfortunately, yeah, you haven't really got anything British to back you up, and it's a real shame. The British lineup seems to consist of things that are slow and heavy at 8.7 and 8.3, or literally back of the map machines like the Swingfire and the Striker. The British, they seem to need a lot more fast, mobile assault vehicles, I would say. Stuff that you can push points with and contest capture points and not have to sit at the back of the map for. I think tanks like the Vickers MBT, not the Mark 1 that we have in game at the moment, rather the Mark 3 and the Mark 3i, which is the ERA version, which essentially is a bit like the difference between the AMX 30B2 and the B2 Brenners. So tanks like that, if they were introduced to 8.3, 8.7 Britain, would add a whole new dynamic to the British tree and would make it a lot more viable. And whilst the Chieftain in itself is a very good tank, it's not able to stand up to the meta of the 8.3, 8.7 matchmaker. You look at the tanks at that range, from 7.7 to about 9.0, and everything that is good has mobility, or it has a lot of armor. Tanks like the Leopards, tanks like the T10M, IS-4, the M60 Rise, MBT-70, or the XM803, all those tanks have either absolutely amazing mobility or absolutely amazing armor combined with that mobility. Whereas the Chieftain has mobility, has armor and firepower. So the British need something with mobility and with that ability to engage at close quarters, which the Chieftain doesn't have, in order to make them a little bit more viable at that battle rating. Note that they also need some good close air support, because the Sea Fury and the Vampire, whilst they're okay, the Sea Fury is an absolutely garbage plane, so it's not really going to cut it. But realistically, you work with what you've got, I guess. So, personally, what I would like to see from Gaijin is the addition of more mobile tanks, because I could have had that capture point very easily, and I should have gone and capped it. And with a tank that has more mobility, I would be able to go and take that and then move on, and move very quickly and respond to the battlefield very, very rapidly. Whereas if I'm in a Chieftain, I have to bide my time, I have to wait. I can't afford to be as aggressive because you simply do not have that combination of mobility, armor, and firepower that works in a way that is beneficial to you, the team, the matchmaker, the maps, and your playstyle. Now, what would I like to see in terms of specifically from Gaijin? I'd really like to see more Vickers MBTs, more APCs, and better close air support for the British. And honestly, that would probably be enough. That would be heaps. And I think that would make the British a lot more tactically viable. They're still good. They're still fun. But to add a little bit of meta, I guess, to the British, something a bit faster. And this can go all the way up to top tier as well. Because at top tier, the British don't have anything that's mobile, and it hurts them really badly. You can see it from the Challenger 1, and the Challenger 1's rate of play, it's one of the least played top tier MBTs. So, overall, Gaijin Gib, but the Chieftain is still fantastic. It's still a lot of fun, and it's got a great gun now. The buffs have really, really done it well, and it's just so much fun to play. Anyway, ladies and gents, let me know what you think about the Challenger 1, and let me know what else to fly or drive out next. But until then, take care, and I'll catch you next time. German bias.